HR Unboxed with Natalie and Faye.
Welcome to episode 4 of HR Unboxed with Natalie and Faye, and we're back again. Hello.
Good afternoon. Hello. Hello, Chris.
So this episode is called The One with the New Starter, and today we're talking about maybe if you've got a small business and you're starting to employ staff for the first time, what you need to do, that whole rigmarole of what you have to go through to get somebody on board and what can go wrong. The juicy gossip of what's happened when new starters haven't worked out and people have quit the job within the first day or the first hour or the first couple of minutes, which does happen, I guess. And it's just so, and also the pitfalls. So things that can go wrong, how you can break the law, how you can get yourself unstuck. So much to bear in mind. And this is something that I think a lot of people, when they're running a business for the first time, they haven't given it a huge amount of thought. They've just been like, oh yeah, we'll just employ somebody. But it really is a big process, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And so many people can get it wrong really quickly. And just so you know, the record for the shortest new starter that I've ever had was 2.5 hours. And they just said, the job's not for me. At least they were honest. The job's not for me. And they just left.
Just straight out of there. Hadn't even unpacked their pencil case. No. They're just straight out of the door.
Not even the stationery or notebook. That, some people just weren't really committed, really. But you can't help but laugh. But at least, as I said, they were honest and told the employer, look, I really don't think the job's for me. Sometimes they just don't turn up at all. So it's quite a mixed bag when hiring the right person.
It is. They haven't even got into the stationery cupboard. They're already out of the door. No ruler, no stapler, just leaving. Not even a biro.
No, that's it.
That's just it. So we're going to go through this logically, and we're going to start at the beginning, go right the way through the process when you've just woken up in the night and gone, do you know what? I can't do this on my own. I need somebody else in my business. I need another employee. What's the first thing that you need to start thinking about?
So it's about what you actually need. And being a business owner myself, I can honestly say, hand on heart, that it is the most terrifying thing is hiring your first employee, because you're not just responsible for the incomings and outgoings of the business and the general activity, whilst being your own accountant and marketer and everything else that we get thrown at us. It's actually being responsible for somebody else's mortgage is how I see it. So when I put a random post on LinkedIn one day, we'll start with a story. I put a random post on LinkedIn and I was being quite cheeky towards my former employer to say, well, how well am I doing? Which is very naive of me to do so early on. But so I put up a post on LinkedIn. I said, I'm run ragged. I need an extra pair of hands. The next minute, I've got this random lady called Faye Ramsey in my inbox saying, hi, I'll be your extra pair of hands. We met for dinner, didn't we? And it just went from there.
So you didn't follow any of the processes that we're about to talk about. You literally just stuck it on LinkedIn and gave her a job.
Pretty much. I think it's about having someone who has the aligned values. But also, I couldn't wish for a better employee in terms of, I don't like calling Faye that because she's so involved in the business and things like that. She's my right-hand lady. So when I put myself out there, you feel very vulnerable as a business owner because you're like, oh, what if this doesn't work out? That is always on your mind. We're conditioned as humans to think what's the worst that could happen rather than what's the best thing that could come out of this.
So you sat there thinking, if this doesn't work, Faye's back out on the streets. You don't know what she's going to be doing.
Exactly.
She'll fend for herself.
I know. How scary is that? But there's a lot of people that be listening to this thinking, I really need that person, but how far? I don't know what my business is doing. I'm so overwhelmed with the day-to-day that what tasks am I supposed to give this person? What am I supposed to do? So defining the role is the first starting point.
I think it is a risk, isn't it? And I think you've got to make sure that person is paying for themselves, because otherwise what's the point? So you've got to be honest with yourself, and you've got to be honest with them when they're applying for the job and say, look, this is what we expect, because otherwise, I'd be better off not having you as part of the business if it costs me more than you're bringing in.
Yeah, there's definitely a commercial aspect to it. You have to make sure that you've got the, first of all, the demand to be able to carry that person, because they've got to learn the job, but they've also got to learn a new company that hasn't got the defined hierarchies and structures and standard operating procedures that a large-scale corporate would have, and most of the time people are coming from those environments into a completely new business. But I think Faye could probably elaborate on what that looks like from her perspective and what she's found in terms of coming on board to us as a new business.
Yeah, I think well, I think it is a risk, but I think it's a risk both sides, because equally we had that conversation. You said, look, we're in the infancy stage. We're just, kind of getting going with clients and the workload and what that looks like. And so again, like Natalie said, it's defining that role and what I could bring to Rebox. So after a couple of discussions, a few phone calls and a couple of dinners, because of course we had to throw food in, we kind of made that decision. And Natalie then obviously gave me the job offer, and then it was kind of that, it was cemented in my mind that was the choice I was going to take.
So what were you considering at that point? Were you working somewhere else at that point, and you were thinking actually it would be nicer to work with Natalie and have a little bit more involvement?
Yeah, so I, whilst it was kind of, should we call it, my title in my previous employment was personnel, didn't have the HR piece in addition to that, but essentially it was head office, working with people, being responsible for that documentation and such, but it didn't give me the exposure or the opportunity to kind of more go into the HR industry, and I wanted to explore that more. And unfortunately, my current employer at the time didn't offer that, but equally they weren't a HR consultancy. So I then obviously had the conversation with Natalie, and she said, this is what I can give you. But from my side of the fence, this was a conversation with my family to say what this would look like, because I'm coming out of, 5.5 odd year employment to go into a small business, and that there are risks there. I'm taking the jump just as much as Natalie took the jump to take me on. I'm taking the jump to come into a small business essentially. So if it goes wrong, well, it can't afford to, and here we are. So I'm here nearly 3 years later.
But at that point, you've got to get everybody on side. You've got to get your partner and your family and everybody to really believe in you that this is the right decision for you, and it is a bit of a risk, but it's going out of your comfort zone and doing something that's slightly more scary, but with much greater rewards at the end of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as long as I've always been a backer of myself. And once I kind of had that conversation with family and said, this is what I need for me, then they were absolutely on board. My family are very encouraging to, my career support. So yeah, that helped greatly. And, at the end of the day, you're a long time doing what you're doing, so you need to be happy doing it. There's no point getting up on, the Sunday night, Monday morning horror thinking, oh God, what am I stepping into today? I don't feel that. And I'm grateful that I took that risk.
I think it's really interesting hearing it from the employee's perspective when you're an employer and you're thinking about hiring somebody. And I think a lot of it, the decision that you make, a lot of it is down to the people that you're going to be working with as much as the job description. And I think it's so important when you're interviewing somebody and you're going through that process.
Yeah.
It's just the way you put yourself across and your company is to make them as passionate about working for you as you are to have them working for you.
Yeah, I think a couple of times people have said, to Natalie, they've said, so you've brought your friend on. And just as a disclaimer, we actually didn't know each other prior to me working with Natalie. We knew each other in a virtual capacity on LinkedIn and such, but we hadn't ever met, and we didn't know of each other. So, it was that kind of, that first meet, and we're kind of gauging each other. It was kind of, it was an interview without being an interview. Yeah, I guess, right? So it was kind of, what do I wear? Do I go suited and booted? What meal's this? What questions am I going to be asked? And it wasn't like that, because we wanted to understand each other on that space where we could just have a conversation. So I think that is where our professional relationship has grown from.
Yeah, definitely. And on the other side of the table, I'm sat there going, don't get too excited. Don't get too excited. She is definitely Rebox material. And it was so hard for me not to, and I'm telling managers all of the time, don't overcommit. don't say this, don't say that, keep it cool. And there's me being full on Del Boy in the wine bar moment, going, oh my gosh, keep it cool, keep it cool.
Did you lean back against the bar and suddenly, what?
It was a bit like that, Chris, because you're thinking, well, is this person going to like me? Because you're being vulnerable enough as a business owner as it is, saying, I need help. And we're not very good at that. And Faye will tell you, I'm probably one of the worst people for asking for help. I tend to try and see if I can find some sort of resolution myself before I then try and seek that additional pair of hands that could have made the job 10 times easier. But because you're used to doing all of the things, you find it really difficult to take your hands off a little bit. So I've had to do a lot of learning myself, becoming an employer rather than advising employers. So Faye's quite right. You've got to love what you do, because if you don't, doing something you dislike, it is a long time to do something you don't enjoy. And, you know, people, whenever Faye and I go to networking events, or I don't know, we might go to an expo or something like that. If we're on our own, people go, where's Faye? Where's Natalie? We're expected to come as a package.
You're like Hanson Deck of HR, aren't you?
Yes. Let's get ready to rumble.
Yeah.
We won't use that in a disciplinary scenario, no.
Probably not. It would break the ice though, wouldn't it?
It really
If you
would.
did a little PJ and Duncan dance routine and then you sat down and said, right, now, we're going to get serious.
Yeah, I think we could pull that off.
So next step, dance routine.
Dance routine. So I think going back to employing people, obviously it's what I was saying before about making sure that they're covering their costs. But I think you've also got to think about how much time they're going to save you as the business owner, and what difference that's going to make to the business. So it might not necessarily be that this is somebody that's going to directly cover their salary. It might be that the benefits they bring to the business are worth that, and are worth more because they free up your time to be doing the things that you really should be doing.
Yeah, so as a business owner, the first thing that I always get people to look at is, what is your hourly rate? Break it down to what your hourly rate actually is versus what your desirable hourly rate would be. And there's a very distinct difference between the two, because the first one, you think, oh, I'll go in, I'm a new business, I'll do an introductory offer and everything. But I can't recommend enough that people know what their true value is. What is it that you actually bring to your clients, your service users, customers, those sorts of things. So if you're actually looking at what that looks like versus what the true value is, you'll often find that you put in a lot more work and a lot more effort. So you're actually offering what your true value is, but you're not charging for it. And when you've got overheads, so for example, I've got IT costs, I've got an office, I've got PAYE, pensions, all of that stuff. I have to count the cost of holidays, sickness absence, all of this stuff you have to have very much detailed and taken for in your budgets. And a lot of business owners, when they're recruiting their first person, get caught up in the excitement of it rather than what actually it is from a practical perspective. And that's when you start to find that people go, oh my gosh, if I made a mistake by recruiting someone, I can't afford it. But if you do the commercial focus piece first, which is what a lot of our clients have started to come to me for, before they then put the strategy in place to recruit their first person.
It's almost like being an accountant then, isn't it, really? Because it's doing a business plan and working out the numbers and making sure that you've got some sort of spreadsheet where you've got all of those things that you said, all of those factors, and you can make sure that what you're charging as your hourly rate, you're not going to actually be losing money on it, going out and doing the work and thinking, hang on a minute, I've been working really hard this month and I've made a loss. What's going wrong here?
This is exactly it. And this is why a lot of those businesses fall in those 50% figures that we see, where people haven't survived their first 2 years. I'm so fortunate to be sat here going into year 5 of trading, and a lot of people will think, oh, you know, well, you're just a little HR consultancy, but it's taken me time and learning to get from that initial, oh, I'll charge, I don't know, £35 an hour or something, versus what we actually charge now, which is the value. And when you focus on the result, that's when the magic happens. Because if a client is paying you money but they can't see value or a result from the actions and the money they're investing in, they think, well, why do we get HR involved in the first place? So having that definition first before you then start to scope out a role, responsibilities, that sort of thing. It's really important that you do your numbers first. I can't emphasise how important that is, and don't wing it, because that's exactly what I did.
And I think you're right. A lot of companies will just say, "What will we charge? Let's see what other people are charging, and yeah, that'll be about right. Yeah, so much an hour." You want to be competitive. You want to make sure that that people will see the value in what you're offering. But actually, that's completely the wrong way around to do it, because that's not what it's worth. It's worth what it costs you, and working out those calculations, like you say.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so on to the next stage. So you've decided that you want to employ somebody.
Yep.
And if you were doing this properly and not just going on LinkedIn and having a coffee and saying, "Oh, Faye's lovely, let's just give her the job straight away," you'd write some kind of job description, role description. How do you do that?
Yes, so once you understand that you need that extra pair of hands, it's then defining the job role responsibilities. So you need to make sure it's robust enough to cover operationally what that person needs to do and bring to the table, but equally that there is room for growth in the role, because nobody wants to come on and then just be stagnant. But equally, a lot of people and a lot of clients that we deal with, a lot of their teams, if they looked at their job role when they first came on to their job role now, say 18 months, 2 years, 3 years into it, I can guarantee it's completely different. Because there's always room for growth. So that,
but also people bring their own touches to jobs, and sometimes there's things that they're interested in that they want to do a bit more of, and there's kind of extra responsibilities that they take on while they're working there. And I guess that's okay, or should you keep updating the job description as you go along?
I think Faye's a prime example of that, to be honest. Her role was completely changed.
Yeah.
So I thought, I just want someone to come in and do the HR admin piece, and to, answer the phone for us, to get the general inquiries through the door, and then I lend my many years of knowledge and expertise, and I give that to her so that she can then grow and develop her own career. Because I'm very mindful that when you come into a small business, there's often this perception that there's no room for career progression or growth. If anything, you're getting second to none commercial experience from working in a small business. I've worked for large-scale consultancies, and I've not ever had the level of exposure or support as to what I had when it was around 2012 that I got my first foot in the door with the first small company that I worked for. And they were a small logistics firm in Heathrow. And I tell you, I was exposed to everything. They would tell me, "Natalie, this is what pain points I've got. This is what we think we should be going in direction-wise." There are so many things that you don't get exposure to, and a lot of people go, "Oh yeah, but you haven't got a blue chip company on your CV." I just think that's a load of tosh, because you've got your own experience, you bring your own style of HR. I can't emphasize how important that is. Nobody does HR the same, and they shouldn't. So when Faye's come on board, she's earned her stripes, she's worked her way up, and I think your first job role was like a HR assistant role, and then now she's a HR consultant. So she's fully defined her own role, and just as long as she's happy in her role, that's good. She's performing well, she's doing everything, she's getting involved in things like podcasts that she's never had
I
exposure
feel like this
to
is my
before.
appraisal.
No, they went in the bin in the last episode.
So you're going to keep her on then?
Oh yeah. She's a lifer. Yeah.
Phew, sigh of relief. I think you got through this year. Yes, nailed it. So there you go. So you've determined the role and responsibilities, and now the next thing to do is just let people know about it, to advertise the job. How do you go about doing that? What's the best process to do that? Are there different ways of advertising jobs nowadays?
There is absolutely different ways of advertising a job role, and it depends on what works for you. So we do partner with a recruitment specialist, Hireful, and they do help a lot with analysing what that job looks like, the best campaign, the best usage, the best place to put the advertisement, and they can direct all of that to us. I mean, we don't advertise ourselves as recruitment experts. However, we do help clients with what that looks like. So whether that's, just advertising simply to put it out on LinkedIn, or if you want an Indeed, CV library, that kind of campaign, and then people will just put their applications through, and then we just kind of see what that looks like. There's no right or wrong way of doing it. I think what it is just to outline and define. Again, we go back to what you need off that person, and we make sure that's descriptive enough in the job advertisements. You're getting the right candidate come through.
You hear a lot about there being a shortage of quality candidates for jobs at the moment, and there's an awful lot of some jobs. There's hundreds of applicants for each role, but then other jobs there just doesn't seem to be the right kind of applicants, and you really struggle to find someone with the right skill set that you're looking for. And I think some companies employ people to go and look at what who their competitors are employing, and kind of seeing if they can sort of headhunt people and find the right person to kind of jump ship and move across. Is that getting more common? Is that a good idea to do that, do you think?
I mean, having a look what competitors are doing, that's just a given. People need to know what the market looks like, because ultimately driving people towards even applying for your role, we go back to that piece about salary and actually advertising that, because so many companies don't. And, that leads to quite a lot of frustration from candidates applying for a role, because you're taking the time out of your day, you go into let's say an hour's interview to sit there and be told that your salary is actually lower than the one you're currently on. And in the best of the world, that's not conducive for anybody, because that person will very likely turn down then that job offer. So I think it's all about transparency.
So can you advertise a job with no clue as to what the salary is going to be, or do they just put huge range from so many thousand to so many thousand, and it's just like, well, that could be anything?
Yeah, I mean, they do there's a lot of ranges, and that comes with experience and what you can bring to the table. And I guess until you're in front of the person looking to employ you in interview stage, they don't know what that looks like. So once they understand your experience, your exposure, your what you can do and what you can bring, maybe you'll get at the higher range. I do see a lot of advertisement for job roles where there's nothing. There's no salary. It's not even benchmarked, so you don't know what you're walking into. You see a senior title and assume it's going to be for a lot, but actually coming to have that interview stage and speaking to that person, you could find that it's not quite a lot, because why don't you want to put the salary on there?
Why do they do that then? Is it because they think it's going to put people off applying? But what's the point then if they're not going to take the job?
Well, this is it. And when I worked in the financial services sector, I would be in charge of putting the adverts onto the job boards and things like that. And they'd say, don't advertise a salary because it's internal company policy. Now, what happened at that point is that we'd get people in for interviews, and then all of a sudden there wouldn't be any there wouldn't be any interest, because the candidates would then say, do you know what? No, that's too low for me. So you've already wasted a significant amount of time to get to that point, only for the candidates to say, yeah, that's not going to work for me. So I always believe that honesty should be the best policy, and people should actually put, if you don't want to put the exact figure on there, put a range in there. So whenever we're supporting clients with their recruitment campaigns, we always put a range in there, so just so that we are attracting the right people rather than putting people off.
Yeah, absolutely. And also just so that it sets people's expectations and you feel that it's fair, because if you don't put anything down, you might think, you've just decided you don't like me very much, so you've offered me less money than you could have done if I'd made answered the questions differently, or pretended that I was earning 10 grand more than I actually am, what I'm getting paid a bit more. Are you allowed to do that when you're in an interview? Is kind of be a little bit more creative with your answers?
I think people need to really tailor their recruitment approaches in terms of something that fits for the company. So whilst me interviewing Faye, I'll say interviewing Faye, was more around actually the company fit, because it's really important that you get the right person who is passionate and equally passionate about my company. For others that may be recruiting, several roles, they might choose to do an assessment centre and see how people work as part of teams and things like that. But a lot of the time, Faye and I get approached by clients to interview people, and Faye came back from an interview process a few months ago, and the client was straight on the phone to her saying, oh my gosh, we loved this candidate, we absolutely loved him, he was brilliant. Faye goes, was he? And they're looking at her quite stunned, as if to say, well, what didn't you like about him? What did you see that we didn't? And when Faye started highlighting all of the red flags with this candidate, they were like, we didn't know that. But because we've been doing the job for as long as what we have...
What sort of things did you spot that they hadn't picked up on?
So when they're looking at the interview stage, predominantly the business is looking for the competency. What can you do, and how can you apply yourself to the tasks that we require? So they're asking all of those sort of base questions. Now, what I do beforehand is ask to see the CV. So then I look through it, I look at previous employment, I look at dates because they're so important. And then on this particular chap, I thought, of the last 4 jobs you've had, why have you never made probation?
You should be on The Apprentice, when they do that bit at the end. And they're like, I see you've written down here.
Yeah, is that person.
But I literally do. I'm quite methodical with it. So I go through and I check the dates and I check previous employments. This isn't me going back and getting references just as a disclaimer. This is just for purely what I see, what is presented to me. But from that, it allows me to create some questions myself. So whilst the interviewer, the client, is giving the competency base, this is the company, this is what we need from you, how do you best display X, Y, and Z? I then come in later and say, could you tell me a bit about, and then we start wheedling down what you are like as a person. And in the best of the world, I thought, I don't want to be sit across from a table 3 to 6 months in because this isn't working out, because why hasn't it with your previous employers? I need to know what that looks like. And that's the bit that they didn't spot.
And that's the awkward thing, that you feel a little bit uncomfortable asking people in interviews when you can sense that something's happened when they're with their last job and they've said, no, I just wanted a new challenge. Rubbish. Why do you just quit a job that's paying you so much money and just be unemployed for a month applying for other things, looking for a new challenge that's so vague? So there's usually a reason.
Yeah, people will only show you the best version of themselves in an interview process. You're not really going to get to know the person. So that's why I always think that what we call a one-stage interview process, I just don't think is very conducive, because it's like going on a first date and deciding that you're going to marry that person. It's really, you just, some people do, but other people don't.
It can work, but you've got to be lucky.
Yeah. Well, that's it. Yeah, it's a needle in a haystack for some people.
It's like employing the first person that you meet off LinkedIn, isn't it?
Well, absolutely.
It works.
It worked out.
So it's
currently
fine.
in a long-term relationship with Rebox HR. I love that. But you've got to be so careful not to get caught up in the whole kind of whimsical, we're recruiting part. And I know I've mentioned that a couple of times already, but I just think that people do get carried away because it's an exciting time for their business. Of course it is. But you have to make sure that you're going about things in the right way and that you're not getting caught up with the emotion side of it, and look at what the long-term scalability is of the business, but also how that person's going to come along for the journey. And I'm just lucky that Faye has joined me very much on mine.
So you say that you would recommend not doing just one interview and then give the person the job. What's the best structure for a recruitment process to have like different stages? Is it a 2-stage thing or 3-stage? Does it really depend on the job?
Well, Faye and I, when we advise our clients, I'll give you an example. It's quite good for us to do the first stage interview over the telephone. It only lasts 15 to 20 minutes. But the best thing that we can do is to have somebody impartial to say whether they feel that would fit. We get to know our clients quite personally. We know their businesses very well. So we know what they're looking for, even if they're not sure what they're looking for themselves.
So is that kind of like a filter, the first stage, just a basic screening to make sure that they have got the minimum requirements for the job?
Yeah, absolutely, because there's nothing more disheartening to an employer when you pick up the phone, you're all excited to make the call, and then all of a sudden you're like, it's so-and-so calling from such and such company, and they go, sorry, who? Why are you calling me? And I can't tell you how many times I've had that response over the years.
Because they've applied for so many jobs, they've just forgotten what they've applied for.
Absolutely.
And they weren't that fussed about your job, but they've literally gone down whatever website and they've just like apply, send their standard CV off to everyone and just hope that one of them lands.
Yeah, and it just comes across as really like disheartening to that employer, especially if you are a small business. For large scale employers, I'm sure that they're pretty much used to it, and their recruitment teams are, because you've got the delights of what we call one-click apply on most of these job boards, and it's really off-putting, because you think, well, actually, are you as passionate about our company as what we are, and do you really want the job, and things like that? So
you can see why people do it, and when you're looking for a job, you haven't got time to just sit there for half an hour applying for every single job and writing a personal application, even though if you really want a job, that's the way to do it, is to tailor your application to the job that you're applying for.
Yeah, it's true, and it's super competitive. So when you look at, these job boards, it will tell you how many people have applied for these jobs, and there's thousands in some cases. It's nuts, and I think there's a lot of changes that have happened in the job, especially on the job sector, around like the buoyancy, and there's other factors at play, such as small businesses coming into the market. You've got the large corporates that are paying big wages to retain their talent. Their employees might not necessarily be happy, but they're paying the big money to keep those people in those jobs, because they're losing the skills and knowledge. A lot of people are building corporate careers. They build these corporate careers, and then they decide to go out on their own and create that, what they would see as what they would want in their own company, I suppose. So it's quite a challenge for anybody who's either recruiting or whoever's looking in the job market at the moment. But if we've got any listeners that are applying for jobs, perhaps they're unemployed or been made redundant recently, it's really important that you make your application stand out, and that you have a list of people that you've applied to, just so that you do sound engaged and motivated when that phone call does come through, because it does.
Do you know what I find though, is that sometimes your perfect candidate might not have on paper exactly the qualifications that you've put down in your filters, and sometimes people who may be a bit later in life, who've got more experience, or they've not come through the traditional routes of academia or whatever, they might be brilliant for your job. They might have transferable skills from doing something different. Yeah. But when you've got 1,000 applicants and you've got to find a way of screening them, it's very easy to miss out on those little gems. So I think sometimes having too much choice can be a really bad thing, because it stops you noticing those slightly more quirky but potentially perfect candidates.
Yeah, as we mentioned in the previous episode about steady eddies, there's not enough steady eddies in the world, and I didn't look, when I was recruiting, I didn't look at qualifications, because I've had that drilled into me since the very beginning of my HR career, and I'm fortunate that I have my master's and my CIPD qualification, but that wasn't the first thing I was looking for. I wanted someone who had a bit of fire in their belly and really wanted to do a good job and was passionate and motivated, because those are the opportunities I didn't get when I was first starting out in a HR career, and I was often overlooked for promotional opportunities, and I was really good at my job. That's not me blowing my own trumpet. It was that I was doing a lot of the work, and I had more experience than the people that were in more senior roles to me. So I found it quite off-putting that every time, I don't have a CIPD level 7 at the time, so you're not eligible for promotion and things like that. So I'm always really keen to know more about the person, because the reason that I was hired for my first HR role, I said, look, I've got no qualification. I've been to 9 interviews that week, Chris. I was knackered. And I was on my last interview, and I said to this lady, look, I don't have a CIPD qualification. All I can bring you is that I'm very good at admin. I'm very good with clients and customers. I will do the best representation of your HR department that I possibly can, and I will do whatever it is that you need me to do to be successful in this job. And I was the last person in this long line of people that was sat outside this interview office. And she looked at me and she said, this isn't a job to you, is it? I said, no, this is the opening of my career. And she said to me, you start on Monday. And I have never had somebody really believe in me at that point. So to have somebody believe in you and say, actually, I'm going to give you a chance, is one of the most... I will always remember that for the rest of my life, is that was the opportunity I was given. So I now do that a lot by passing that on into, you know, what I did throughout my corporate career, but also to Faye as well.
But it's got to be the right person. You can't just give those life-changing opportunities to somebody that's not that fussed, that couldn't remember what company they'd applied for. And they're like, yeah, I'm going to level with you. I've got no qualifications. I'm pretty lazy. I struggle to get out of bed in the morning, but do you know what? This isn't just a job to me. This is a way of life. Yeah.
Dedication to the cause.
I see this as a real chance for me to keep up with my own social media while you're looking the other way. And can I make sure that my screen's facing the wall so nobody can see what I'm up to? Yeah. Okay, so now you've found this perfect candidate, you've got to actually give them a job. And this is where all the fun part of your jobs and my hell comes in. It's all the paperwork and all the admin. What do you have to do to actually bring someone on board and make them an employee?
So the first thing that you would need to do is send out the job offer.
Right.
So let's see if they are interested. So you detail all the particulars. So this is things like their working pattern, salary, you know, the expectation, all into this document. And the offer letter then goes off to the candidate. One thing that is a prerequisite of or being subject to the employment is that they produce their right to work in the UK, and that they might have to display a couple of references, previous work references. And then we detail what that looks like to have that information back to us by a certain time.
So just because you've offered somebody the job, maybe over the phone or verbally,
Yep.
you're not committed to giving them a job until they've got back to you with the references and their right to work and all of those kind of things. You're not in any legal obligation to employ that person at that point.
No. So we specify this within our offer letters, and it is subject to that because, you know, typically you can't employ somebody if they don't have right to work. Law supersedes that of what you might want to do. So they need to be able to evidence that they can actually work in the UK, and then it's going to be based on references. And you do have, or at least we write in the offer letter, that there's a right to withdraw. So if we haven't heard from the candidate for I don't know, 2, 3, 4 weeks, and we've put in a date and say we need this information by then, it's our by right to then withdraw that job offer to offer someone else, because how long do you wait? It's not an open-ended kind of conversation to say, you know, come on when you're ready. We need you now. We need you by this date. Can you commence here? Can you prove you can work here? And what's your references like from your previous employment? So it depends how technical. There is other industries that have more robust offerings. So this is essentially making sure maybe they've got a clean and valid driving licence, if that's applicable to their job role. They might need other particular qualifications.
Yeah, like the CRB checks and things.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I know with accountancy firms, there is a fit and proper declaration that needs to be completed to say, you know, I'm being truthful. I can, you know, put forward my placement for work in this particular industry because I don't have any, you know, criminal records and bits and pieces. So DBS checks, bits and pieces like that are subject to employment.
Are there a lot of companies that get this stuff wrong? That offer somebody a job, write a letter quickly on their computer without putting much thought into it, and they think, oh, well, you know, they had a job before, they've been living in this country for 10 years at least, surely they've got the right to work in this country, and they don't bother doing all of those checks?
Yeah, my advice is never assume. You always ask for it. If you've never worked with that person, they're coming into your employment, you need to do these checks. You are liable for what that looks like, so you need to make sure you can evidence that to create the statutory excuse so you're not fined if it's wrong. So if you've done all your due diligence and you've had a look into this person, made sure they're applicable for work in the UK, and understand the work references. Now that, you know, that's by the by for if that's what the business wants to do. I know some are happy with one work reference, some places want 2 work references, so it's whatever applies. But one of the biggest legalities is right to work. That has to be conducted no matter what industry, no matter how big or small. One thing that I wouldn't do in an offer letter is overcommit, whereby you write this glorious offer letter and you say, you know, you can have X, Y, Z, and then it comes to writing the contract and it's different. And I said, but you didn't say that in interview. You said I was on this bonus structure and I'm all in this and I'm doing that. Yeah. And you have massively overcommitted because you've got excited, maybe, because you've said, you know, we operate this Christmas bonus and you'll be on this commission. But what does that actually look like? You need to really think about the fundamentals of this role as basic. Anything else that the company offers then comes after.
It might be that in the interview you said these things, and it's true that you do offer Christmas bonuses, but you don't want to put it in the contract. You don't want to be committed to it. It's just something that you do because, you know, most years the company can afford it, but you don't want to be obliged to doing Christmas bonus every year. But should you not mention it in the interview if it's not something that's going to be in the contract?
This is the problem. People do get overexcited, don't they? So to have Christmas bonuses or bonus structures or commission structures, Faye and I always recommend that none of this goes into a contract of employment. It's not because we don't want the employee to have it, just to put a disclaimer out there. It's because then the company has no flexibility and then they then have to consult to get out of that contract, which obviously they're going to come up against quite a challenge. So what you have in place separately is a separate agreement. So it might be upon completion of probation, for example, and there's a lot of work to be done around probations that we've got with the up and coming changes in law, for example. But we do have a lot where people will overcommit and then all of a sudden, well, you can't take that away from them because you're contractually liable for them. Otherwise, the employer is in breach of contract if they don't provide that. So if they're clear and say, well, actually, upon completion of probation, we do look at being able to provide a bonus structure, commission structure if they're in sales or business development. So we do look at the broad picture, but Faye and I outline this to the client beforehand. So it's always best that they have that structure before they go into the meeting and saying, oh, we love you, here, have everything. Yeah. And then the next minute the business might not be doing so well because you've got to adjust to the additional costs coming in. And then all of a sudden they're like, we can't really afford that. What are we going to do? So we just avoid all of that. So one, it's clear and concise for the employee. They know exactly what's going on. But two, the employer has peace of mind to say, well, actually, I know what I'm doing with this process and I don't have to worry about it, because a lot of the stuff in HR, if you Google it, it's all about the things that you can't do rather than the things that you can do to prevent any complaints or escalations coming in, because that's where the breakdown in a lot of employment relationships comes in, because they don't feel that they have been communicated to effectively, or some of the language we've seen recently is that my employer has lied to me. So these are really quite serious blanket statements that we're seeing from employees and employers. We have to remember that in the current market of employment or the current workspace is that there is a distinct difference in expectations from the employer side and the employee side. They're not aligned at all, purely because, one, the law does work in a particular way. And some people listening will probably agree or disagree with that. And we have to remember that employment law isn't there to be, about what's right and wrong. It's about what's justified, and to understand the processes that go behind it. So when you're employing your first person, you have to give the best first impression of your organisation. So the best thing to do is to avoid any of that miscommunication piece as much as possible.
Or just be clear and just say, look, we have this bonus structure. It's at our discretion every year, so it won't be part of your contract, but everyone here has been getting it for the last few years, and hopefully this is something that we'll be able to continue doing if the business is going. Just be honest, don't overpromise, like you say. Yeah. So what's the situation if you contact somebody for references and they don't get back to you? So you've got somebody who's ready to start, and you're waiting for their references, and you've contacted both of their referees and you're not getting a reply. Should you keep waiting? Can you withdraw the offer? Should you go back to the applicant and say, they haven't replied to me? Does that kind of ring a few alarm bells if that happens, or are most people usually quite good at replying?
I'm going to give you that typical answer, Chris. It depends.
I knew you were going to say.
For certain sectors, for example, you've got the aviation industry, which is a sector that I used to work in when I was in transport and logistics. You have to have a very clear chain of references and confirmation of dates of employment. And that can be no longer than 28 days. So you can't have a break of employment. Otherwise, you then have to justify what you were doing in that time for aviation security purposes. For the care sector, you need to have a clear chain of references. They have to be satisfied. Now, the difficulty here is that employers are not obligated to give a reference. A lot of people go, oh crikey, but what if my employer gives me a bad reference? What you can't do as an employer is give someone a negative reference upon emotion or emotionally based that would prevent that person from seeking alternative employment. So a lot of people do worry about that.
So what can you okay, talking about you as an employer of somebody, and you've been asked for a reference, and this is somebody who you really wouldn't recommend to anybody as a member of staff because they're useless and lazy, and it's a lot of emotional stuff and nothing that you can really pin down and say because they haven't actually done anything wrong, but you just feel like they're just rubbish. Yeah. Can you write anything on the reference?
Gosh, that's rather subjective, isn't it? So it does come down to opinion based. It might be that person just didn't enjoy the job, and this is what I don't understand, is that if you're not happy in a job, I would leave. That's just me, and I have done, because I wasn't, I'm not prepared to put that energy into something that is not going to better my life or my position. That's just how I am. But with some people will stick at a job because they might have good benefits or things like that. The job for life doesn't exist anymore. But when you're coming down to things like references and people saying what they feel on a reference form, it can get you into a lot of trouble as an employer.
So what can you write on a reference that makes it clear that this isn't somebody? Could you just write literally, they worked for me between these dates? That is all I have to say.
That is pretty much it. You can provide a factual reference. So our advice to our clients is job title and dates of employment for everybody, because then you're demonstrating a fair and consistent process and you're not leaving yourself legally exposed. So there are some forms that we see, aren't there, Faye, where they've got tick boxes on to say what was their attendance like, what was their disciplinary like. Just as long as you're being factual with the reference and you're not saying something that could prevent them from securing a future role.
But you need to have the documentation to be able to do that. So if it says what was their attendance like and you haven't made a note of every time they've turned up late, you can't tick bad attendance, because if they then took you to court or something, you wouldn't be able to prove that what you've said is true.
Well, the first thing the employee is going to say was, well, show me. And we see it quite often, don't we? All of our clients, they behave on that front. And if they're not sure how to phrase something, they'll come to Faye and I and they'll say, this person was amazing to work for me. Can I give them a bit more than what you're telling me to give them? And we're like, absolutely. And some have even called their new employer and said, do you know, you are really lucky to have this person because they were amazing for me. And it's actually really nice. So it does go the other way as well, because it's not always about the bad side of employing people. Some jobs are right for some people and some just aren't for others. As we say, it's what cup of tea is your preference?
So could you write a basic reference, then ring them up and say, I'm not going to write this down, but do not give this person a job.
If anyone has done that, then Faye and I are none the wiser, being honest. But I have had phone calls from other HR professionals when I was in corporate saying, this person has got some serious issues and we think that you need to be aware of them. So those conversations, as far as I'm aware, did happen. I don't know if they do now, because obviously I work in a different capacity, but that is something that you should always be careful of. And of course, most companies' phone calls are recorded these days, so there's no such thing as off-the-record conversations.
No.
Uh-oh. It wasn't me. So you've offered them the job. They've accepted it. Do they have to accept it formally? Do they have to write you a letter to say they've accepted it, or can that be done in different ways?
Yeah, I mean, as long as they've made you aware that that's their intention. So again, on the offer letter that we provide, it does stipulate a signature area for the person to get back with the date and time frame that we would like to receive all the documentation, right to work and such, and their intention to begin with us. And what that does is then allow them to then put notice in, if that's applicable, to their current employer. So then everybody kind of knows. Now, we have had it upon occasion where they've said, oh, I've put my notice in, but, your start date's this, but I can't start because, I've got another week on my notice to do. Absolutely. We're not in the frame of, forcing people's hand, and they have to do right for their previous employer as well, their current one. So with that, it's just communication. If that comes up, just, get in contact with the person that you're coming on board with and say, this is my situation, this is my notice. Just open that communication.
What if you've offered them a job and then at that point they tell you that they have to have 3 months gardening leave or something, and they're not available to start when you thought they could, and they've not been open and honest about that? Can you withdraw the job offer?
I mean, in terms of withdrawing, if the idea is the commencement date is going to be this, typically that would be known because they would have a current contract and it would stipulate their notice period. So most people would be very aware if they're tied into more lengthy notice periods, or if it's your atypical 4 weeks or 1 month's notice. Now, if they're on the 3 month basis, that's predominantly seen in more senior roles, then that would be likely evidenced at the interview kind of stage, or when the offer's going out, for them to get in touch and say, oh, I know you said a commencement. Again, we come back to the open conversation. Just talk about it. Say, look, you've obviously offered this person the role because you feel they're the right candidate. They obviously then display the right skill set. Are you going to let, 6 to 8 weeks come between that? Or as a new employer, are you going to wait and hold on because you're going to bring the right person into the team? So that is very subjective and very dependent on each business.
Okay, so next bit, this is the final section. The employee starter kit. So when you're employing someone for the first time, which is what we were talking about today, you don't have all of that stuff together. What documentation do you need to put together? And is there like a list that you have, like a tick list of everything that you need in this sort of like starter kit?
So we actually automate a lot of the process for our clients anyway. So they just say, Natalie, Faye, I've got a new starter. These are the details. Crack on. And Faye and I will give the best impression to that to that new employee because we know what we're doing with it. And we operate completely paperless at Rebox, so we don't have any printed out contracts and things like that. So the first thing that we'll do is offer them the job on the letterheaded paper and things like that goes across to them electronically saying, congratulations, you've been successful, really looking forward to you joining the team, and it outlines what their initial terms and conditions look like. They then reply to us and say, I'm happy to accept the job, really pleased to be part of it. Faye's done 2 before we started recording this morning. And they really are quite receptive to it. Once we've got that, then we write out the contract, send it across to them, do their right to work checks and all of that stuff. And then we actually start the onboarding process with regards to payroll, because there's nothing worse than someone turning up on their first day to a mountain of forms saying, I need to do all of this stuff. Well, actually, we have a bit more structure behind that. So we'll do all of the payroll stuff, all the fun bits. Make sure that they've got their P46 if they have that already, so they're taxed properly, because a lot of bugbearers for people is when they start from one job and then they move into another role. They're like, oh gosh, yeah, my tax is going to be messy. And there was a time when we were able to ring the HMRC and fix it for the employee in advance. You can't do that anymore because of GDPR. So we have to make sure that the employee knows what to do if their tax isn't right. So it's all about, again, it's being very clear with what that process looks like. So if we take the hassle from our clients by doing all of this stuff, then it's one less worry for them. They've got enough going on as it is. So we actually sell it as a pack for people that aren't clients but just want that help and all that sort of thing.
And do you need other stuff like the employee handbook and policies and forms for requesting holidays and sick leave kind of processes and everything? Do you need to have all of that together?
Yeah, so a lot of our clients work with a system called Breathe, and we're a Breathe partner and have been for many years. We automate all of that process through the system. So when the employee joins the business, they've got their induction pack ready, because it's all automated through the system, and it will say step 1, you need to do this, step 2, you need to do that. And then it's also got the modules in there, so it covers like the health and safety induction, what they need to do in case of if they need mental health support at work. And people are being a lot more, what should we call, very caring about what that looks like as an onboarding process, because it demonstrates that we're a values-driven organisation. We're not here to give you lip service. We put these mechanisms in place to help and support you. And it's quite a nice way of being able to introduce people to the business. And it also gives a very professional approach, rather than we're a startup, we're not quite sure what a contract is. We'll give you that once you're 8 weeks in. The 8-week rule has been long gone for a long time.
Also, you used to have 8 weeks to get this stuff sorted, but now you've got to do it on day 1.
Yeah, so they must have a contract of employment by day 1. So if they haven't had it beforehand, like Faye and I would sort, they need to have it on their first day. Now, when it comes to employment tribunals, there isn't a way of being able to claim for a lack of contract in isolation. And the fine for that is £5,000. It has to be associated to something else. So it could be unfair dismissal, it could be a discrimination claim, it could be a number of different things, but it can't be a claim in isolation, which some people will think, oh, well, that's great, I don't need to do that then. But the contract of employment actually protects you as an organisation as well. You have to remember it works both ways. And a lot of people don't understand that or get that piece right, that like, oh, it's just a piece of paper, we'll download it from the internet. And some of the ones that Faye and I have had for review from people, they've downloaded, some of them are like, the funniest one was a very well-known pizza outlet, and they had terms and conditions surrounding like the quality and temperature of food and things like that. And we're like, oh, we didn't know you deliver pizza, and they said, we don't. And I said, well, that's not what your contract says.
What company was it? What kind of business was it? Was this like an accountant's and they sent out a contract about pizzas?
Yeah, it was an accountancy practice.
Wow.
But the thing is, people do rush these things because they're like, oh, I need a contract. But they don't read it and they don't understand what clauses should be in there. And with financial services, like Faye was saying earlier, you need to have certain clauses and things like that in there. But there wasn't anything like that.
But if they want to start selling pizzas out of the back of their accountants, they're okay.
Yeah, they could. Yeah. Entrepreneurial accountants, they're out there. Get your accounts done whilst you grab a slice. I love that.
Dish accountants.
Dish accountants.
That's brilliant.
I love that. But yes, it's one thing that people do really get wrong, Chris, and it's really important that they proactively protect their business whilst they're doing the right thing by their employees. And we say, if you're doing the right thing by the business, you're doing right by your employees. It's as simple as that. It doesn't need to be complicated.
I didn't know you could get a £5,000 fine for not giving somebody a contract on day 1 though. That's a real eye-opener. And also that nightmare scenario where if you've not got round to giving somebody a contract and then you want to get rid of them and you just dismiss them and think, oh, well, there was no point doing a contract because they're gone already. Then suddenly they take you to an employment tribunal and they've got a claim against you for not having a contract as well as unfair dismissal. Yeah,
I'm dealing with a client currently, or a case at the moment, where somebody hasn't provided their employee with a contract of employment. They've been with them for 8 years. And this person has gone off long-term sick for the first time in that 8-year term of employment. And now they're in a position where they're trying to manage it, but because the expectations haven't been set, they don't have any policies, don't have any procedures. They've just been winging it all these years on the hope that, well, this person's my friend, they're not going to sue me. The amount of cases we're seeing in the tribunal system of families suing their relatives that have given them a job. We've got several cases that are ongoing where it does involve friends and family, and they say, oh, well, they're my friend, they're not gonna sue me, or that's my cousin, they absolutely do. The gloves are off. If somebody feels aggrieved, it costs nothing for an employee to go to a tribunal. Nothing.
And I think also if you're working in partnership with your partner and then the relationship turns bad, then that can have an impact on your working relationship as well.
Yeah, I often get called to mediate between couples where relationships are broken down, but they're both directors of the business. So I've been in situations where there's me, there's the family lawyer in the room, and there's the accountant in the room, and we're all kind of looking at each other thinking, right, so how do we separate this out? Because it does get rather messy, and you have to be very aware of what that kind of looks like. So you have to have a plan in place. If you are a business owner and you're bringing your partner in and things like that, then you have to be very aware of how that relationship works, what the boundary looks like, but also what happens if things don't work out. So yeah, you do have to plan for every eventuality on that one. But yeah, you see the amount of tribunal claims, and one that we saw was a family-run garage. This was highly publicised in the media a few months ago. It was a family-run garage. It was actually the daughter sued her own father for unfair dismissal, and she won. And she won £47,000 in compensation, and that collapsed the business. So
Wow.
These aren't little awards that we're seeing in the tribunal system. So it doesn't matter how big your business is or how small your business is, we're all exposed to the same risks, and we're all bound by the same levels of employment law.
That's going to be awkward around the Christmas dinner table, isn't it? I feel like an EastEnders scene. Right, so wrapping this up, it sounds a little bit daunting. It sounds like there's an awful lot that can go wrong and that you have to do with employing your first member of staff. But I guess this is why bring the experts on board is the advice.
Yeah, absolutely. And it can go right.
Yeah.
So yeah, it can go right, and it can work really well. You've just got to really focus on what it is that you need from that person, what it is that you need in terms of the expectation and scope of the role, but also the long-term plan that comes with it. It doesn't have to be scary. It can be an exercise that does benefit your business massively for years to come. And, you have to look at it as an investment. I'm able to come out and do the show with Faye and things like that. We've got a team that supports us when we're not there. And, we're really lucky, aren't we, to be able to work together and get to do what we love every day. And that's what business owners really do need to focus on, is this serving us well? Is this the right direction? Because the amount of times I'll come in and I'll say to Faye, oh gosh, I've got an idea, and she does this. But I'm like, no, hear me out. And she goes, actually, it work in this way, but it might not work in that way. So once somebody is that embedded in your business, you can actually, we call that where the magic happens.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's the dream though, isn't it? It's just finding somebody that you really gel with. And sometimes you've got to kiss a few frogs before you find a prince.
Absolutely.
In
Just
many
a
ways.
disclaimer, don't kiss anybody in the workplace.
Oh gosh, yes. Faye wants to wrap up the podcast with that, actually. So I think a final thought from Faye is definitely in order.
Not during the interview process, definitely.
Absolutely not.
Has that ever happened? I bet it has.
I'm just thinking, it's never happened to me. I have interviewed someone once where they actually bullied me at school. And they came in and, they were successful in the job interview. They were really good, and the line manager liked them. And I said, look, I can't argue with you, but you can't tarnish someone with what their behaviours were in the past. But he did bring me a bunch of flowers and asked me out to dinner on a Friday night to say sorry. So I didn't go to the dinner, just so you know.
Yeah, well, you've got one there. You could do him for harassment. So what are we going to be talking about in the next episode?
Oh gosh, there is so much to cover. So our next episode will be our Christmas special. So we will be making the studio very festive. We will be wearing Santa hats, and we will be wearing our signature Rebox HR Christmas jumpers that everyone wants one of for some bizarre reason. So we will be wearing those, but we will be talking about things like Christmas parties and where Secret Santa goes epically wrong. I can't wait for that.
Oh, that sounds brilliant. And I can just start to imagine things that might happen at Christmas parties and inappropriate Secret Santa gifts. So that's all going to be on the next episode. I'll need to bring my Christmas jumper as well then, I guess.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. I was going to say, anything that you think could go wrong at a Christmas party, Faye and I have got some stories that really take it up a notch. So be prepared.
And of course, if you've got any questions that relate to that, or you've got any feedback on today's episode, please do get in touch, comment below, and tell your friends, and make sure you tune in for the next episode. But thank you very much again. Another very interesting episode, and we will see you next time. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.